G'day everyone. In November 2018, the Queensland branch of the AEVA held the EV Expo at the Brisbane Convention Centre. This displayed a wide range of electric vehicles and had a bunch of presentations from experts in the industry. And this video is just a couple of those experts and what they had to say. If you're interested in coming to the Queensland branch monthly meeting, it's on the third Wednesday of each month at 7:30 at the Albion Peace Centre. I hope you enjoy the video and I'll see you on the next one.
Stream today. We've got some tremendous speakers on a whole range of topics, but very aptly called planes, trains and automobiles. Our first speaker, you're going to be very impressed here. So Valeh is actually a research fellow in EV charge strategies and is going to be talking to us about charging strategies for the public. A very qualified lady, a master's in embedded system design from Lugano University in Switzerland. I hear you say, what is that? I'm not even going to try and explain it because I'm not sure what it is. And currently doing a PhD in smart energy research at Edith Cowan University. Could you please put your hands together for Valeh?
Thank you for having me here today. Actually, today I'm going to talk about my PhD research that I've been working on that during 3 last years, and the topic of my research is developing a smart charging strategy for electric vehicle charging stations. The outline of my presentation, first of all, I will talk about the main research questions of my research and then the proposed methodology that we have used to implement our ideas, and at the end I will show the results of the simulation. One of the main challenges of increasing EVs on the power grid, from the power grid perspective, is that the uncontrolled EV charging or uncoordinated EV charging may have negative impact on the power grid, especially at peak hours. And as we can see in this graph, the main idea of my project was decreasing the overlap between the EV charging load and the dot curve load at peak hours, especially at around 6 or 7 p.m. So the main research question of my project was, what's the most efficient solution to manage a smart charging strategy for EVs to control this overlap between the PV loads and the residential load? And so the main objective of the project was proposing a smart charging strategy. When I'm saying the smart charging strategy, I mean that a controlling mechanism or somehow it's a decision maker for the EV drivers to go for the best option for charging stations. For achieving this objective, I've considered my system model same as this. For each charging station, I assume that I have 3 options for recharging EVs. One of them is AC charging, one of them can be DC fast charging, and one of them is battery swapping queue. So at each charging station, we can assume that we have 3 different queues for 3 different options for recharging EVs. As a mathematical representation of the system model, I can say that I can consider the set of charging stations as a graph of V and E, that V are the charging station and E is the path between the charging station, the distance between the neighbor charging station. In the side of charging station at real time, I have this information, the waiting time of the queues and the address of charging station, which would be the location of them, and the type of charge, which is related to the rate of charge for each option, and the related price information for each type of charging, AC, DC, and also for the swap battery, also we have a specific price. And in the EVs panel, we have a state of charge for the EVs and the location of that, and the average speed to calculate the remain energy capacity of the battery for the distance from the source to destination. The main objective for this part of my project was finding the best path or the optimum path based on the minimum waiting time at charging stations plus minimum distance from source to destination and minimum charging cost. For achieving this objective, I have used an optimization model, and for solving the solution for my optimization problem, I have used ant-colony optimization, which is a rule-based, which is a path-finding optimization solution that find the best near to optimum path for different EV drivers when they want to go from the source to destination based on their selection of the charging type. So as an input of the system, we have EV's state of charge, as I said in the EV's panel, and we have the source and destination, because based on that, I have to decide what would be the best option. And also we have the real-time waiting time for charging a station that's implemented by queuing model that at each time slot it's changing because of the number of EVs at charging stations. And in the output side, we would have the suggestions for EVs for the best option to go and charge. For my simulation for this part, I have used EV network from the Washington because it was somehow similar to my system model, and in most of the charging stations they have used AC and DC as well for charging EVs with multiple sockets for charging. Just I added the swap battery for the charging station in my system model. After implementing the optimization and the proposed model, I've got these results. I could minimize and I compared my result with the latest smart charging strategy, which was again finding the best path for charging stations. For achieving the minimum waiting time. But we have got better results. As you can see, the green one is mine result, which is the waiting. We could decrease the waiting time significantly at charging station when the number of EVs goes high, and also for the travel time, we could achieve less than the before. And the reason is that somehow it's a coordinated charging. So beside the random charging and go for the charging station only based on the distance, we can manage EVs to go for the best option. Also, we could get we propose a partial charging strategy at this stage, and we said that we can suggest EVs instead of full charging at charging station, especially at peak hours, they can go for the partial charging with highest price, but with the less charging time to decrease the waiting time at charging stations. And as a main achievement of this part of my project was we could decrease the total waiting time at charging station up to 25%. And we could decrease the charging load, the overlap between the charging load and the dot curve at peak hours. This phase of my PhD has been published in one of the highest journal in electrical engineering, and for the more information you can go to this link. And the good thing is that since last year that it's been published, it's one of the 5 top papers in this journal. For the second part of my project, I followed the same direction to minimize again the overlap between the EV's load and the residential load at peak hours. So in the same direction, only the only thing that I have changed in my proposed model is the price of charging stations. And for the price of charging a station, I propose a coordinated dynamic pricing for charging stations. For the coordinated dynamic pricing, I've considered the rule-based instructions for the pricing model, and the rule-based instruction follows the uniform distributions of the EV's load across all charging stations based on the maximum capacities of charging stations, especially at peak hours. So based on and again, for the input of the system, I have the current time and the price of the current time and the price of the 1 hour before. And the price was changing every 30 minutes. It was online dynamic pricing. Again, for the path finding at each time slot, which is 30 minutes, we've updated the price information and found the best option for charging a station to go and charge. Again, for the simulation of this part, I have used the green highway of the Washington, but for the 15 charging station and 500 EVs, and the other parameters of the simulation that I have got these results for this section. The left graph is based on the Q occupancy of charging station with uncoordinated pricing model. As you can see, the price information are different at charging station at different time of the day. But in the right side, I could achieve the coordinated dynamic pricing for charging stations, and this is Q occupancy between the charging station, as you can see, follows the uniform distribution for EVs, and they could charge before reaching the peak hours at afternoon. And the significance of this phase of my project was I could decrease the overlap between the EV's charging load and the dot curve load at peak hours, same as the left graph, which is the blue one is the uncoordinated pricing model or uncoordinated charging, and the red one is our proposed model, which is significantly decreased the overlap between the peak times. And also for the average price, we could get the minimum average at peak hours, and for the waiting times also, as we charged EVs before reaching the peak hours, based on the pricing model, we could get minimum waiting times. And for this section, I could achieve up to 67% of the average PV load during evening peak hours, which was significant between the existing results, and the probability of the overlap, I could improve it up to 46. Also, for this part of my PhD project, I could submit another journal paper, which is still under review. As a summary of my PhD study, I can say that we can propose a smart charging strategy which considered multiple options for charging EVs at each charging stations with the different price information for each charging option. And we also use the optimization. We defined our research question as an optimization problem, and for solving that optimization problem, I have used a heuristic solution for finding the best path. And for the verification, as I said, I verified my result with one of the best existing results in this area, and the simulation environment was MATLAB. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Well, there's a peek into the future. Right, so our next speaker is going to talk to us about hydrogen electric propulsion. Stephanie Moroz has spent over 20 years developing and commercialising clean energy technologies with the big companies and the small, worked with hydrogen fuel cells, the internal combustion engines and lithium-ion batteries. Can you please put your hands together for Stephanie?
Okay, great, thank you. So thanks everyone for joining this session today. Basically, my background is, as mentioned, that I've been in hydrogen fuel cells, but also quite a long time in internal combustion engines, and most recently with lithium-ion batteries. So rather than try to give a one-sided view, which is usually what you hear if someone's talking about hydrogen, it's because they're trying to sell you hydrogen fuel cells, or if they're talking about batteries, it's because they're trying to sell you batteries. I'm going to try to make a more balanced presentation where the pluses and the minuses of hydrogen and really what's going on in the rest of the world and what's more recently started to happen here in Australia. So often if you mention hydrogen, there's a bit of a slogan: is hydrogen going to be forever 10 years away? and if you go back in history, it certainly does seem that way. We've got 1978. This is a great little YouTube clip if you want to search it. It's about Jack Nicholson presenting his hydrogen vehicle. And it's the commentators are funny. They're saying it's running on hydrogen, and the hydrogen produced by solar power. You know, this solar power is this bizarre thing, even more bizarre than running on hydrogen. So then more into when I was working in hydrogen is looking at the 1997. So I was in the thick of it at that point, and all the news was talking about how hydrogen fuel cells were just around the corner, and this was an announcement from Daimler-Benz saying that in 2003 they'll have a car as cheap as petrol engines, and 2 years after that they'll be churning out 100,000 of these a year. So 2005's come and gone, and we're still not there yet. So what's going on here? Why is hydrogen always this fuel of the future, but doesn't seem to be getting to be the fuel of today? And what I'll show is also that in the rest of the world it is starting to be a fuel of today. So that may have finally shortened that 10 years in the future. So a really quick background. I'm going to assume that everyone is pretty familiar with how batteries work. Hopefully that's a safe assumption if we're at an EV conference. But to compare the battery with the fuel cell, they're actually extremely similar. They're both electrochemical processes. The big difference is that with the battery, you have all of the fuel stored within the cell. And the fuel cell, on the other hand, you simply keep adding your fuel as you need it, and you store that elsewhere. And so with the hydrogen fuel cell, you store the hydrogen in a tank, and oxygen you most often take it from the air. So that means that with the battery, if you want longer range, you have to put all of the components of the system in, like battery after battery after battery. And the fuel cell, if you want longer range, you just have to make the tank larger. So that's really a big distinction that occurs, that you can really decouple that power from the range. So if we start to try to compare them side by side, in terms of what's important for mobility applications, you look at batteries. the fuel's widely available even at home, and this is really the big driver for why EVs have started to be taken up so easily, because you need that charging network to go far, but the reality is you can meet 95% of your needs just charging at home and driving somewhere and coming back. And whereas fuel cells, you need to find somewhere that will provide you the hydrogen. And hydrogen is quite challenging to transport long distances, particularly because it's extremely high density from a weight point of view, but being a very light gas, it's difficult to put a lot of hydrogen on a vehicle and transport it to the stations. In some places there are hydrogen networks, like pipeline networks, and that could be a potential for the future. But for the most part, you have to truck it in, and that's been a real setback for hydrogen. As I mentioned before, the range, the batteries, if you can get a certain amount of range comparable to the hydrogen fuel cell quite quickly. They're quite similar at a small range, but as you want to get more and more distance, the fuel cell really comes out ahead because you're not adding anywhere near as much weight as you are to increase the range with batteries. And that's where you get into the whole issues of range anxiety. And cars are starting to make much bigger ranges, but it is coming at a price of a lot heavier car. With that extra weight, you then need more batteries to push that weight along, and it starts to be a circular problem. Now, charging the batteries, one of the things that we keep hearing about is fast charging, because most of the time, if you're just leaving it home overnight, you can charge it, take the time you need. But if you're trying to get somewhere, then you want to charge it fast. So there's all this effort going into the charging networks to be able to pump energy in really fast, but most batteries really don't like to be charged that quickly. There are chemistries that can accept it, but the high energy chemistries used in the vehicles generally really don't like being charged that quickly. So you're shortening the lifetime of your battery if you do it. Whereas with the fuel cells, refueling is pretty much like a liquid fuel. You just come in, you hook it up. It's a little bit different because it has to have a good seal with the gas and a bit more complexity, but the time it takes is very similar. You just pull up, do it, a couple minutes later, you're on your way. Safety now, this could go on for hours if we start talking about the safety. As I said, I spent a long time in lithium-ion batteries, a lot of time in hydrogen. Both of them have some pretty serious safety concerns. Both of them can be managed with the right engineering and the right treating your system the right way and making sure that it's maintained. So rather than go into all the details of what the differences are, I'd say they're different. Personally, I'm probably more afraid of the lithium-ion batteries, but we can probably have some other talk some other time about what the safety differences are. Source of electricity and source of hydrogen. Now, this is another big, it depends sort of thing. Electricity, if you've got coal-fired electricity power plants, then your EV is not any cleaner, and in fact, you're just putting more coal into the air. And similar with hydrogen, almost all hydrogen at the moment is produced from natural gas, and so it's effectively a fossil fuel. Not as nasty as coal, but it's still, unless you're actually going and making the electricity to put in your battery or to electrolyze water to make hydrogen, there's really question around the actual impact on the environment. When we were doing hydrogen fuel cells, when I was in it back in the 90s, the focus was entirely on reducing the immediate emissions. It was more about cleaning up the cities. Back then we had cities in California, Los Angeles, were extremely polluted and you couldn't breathe, much like Beijing now. So that was our focus, but over time the focus has changed to be more about more globally climate change. So then you get the round-trip efficiency. Now, if you're only worrying about emissions, pretty much the same for batteries or hydrogen. But if you're looking at the round-trip efficiency from an electrical point of view, the battery is very high. So you get out almost everything you put in. Now, the efficiency of fuel cells, when back then we were comparing to petrol and diesel, and so the efficiency of the system is much better than those. But if you're looking at it from a purely electrical, renewable electricity turned into hydrogen, turned back into electricity, the efficiency is quite a bit lower than lithium-ion batteries. Cost and lifetime. Now, this is another one. It really depends who you're talking to and what you're comparing. So I'll just leave it at it depends. Needs a lot more details to really discuss the issues around the cost coming down with batteries and the cost coming down with fuel cells, as well as the lifetime implications, because both of them, it depends quite heavily on exactly how they're designed and then even more on how they're used. So I'd say probably more or less similar, depends. Each one can be tailored to suit what you need. And then recyclability. Now, this is often forgotten about. The recyclability of lithium-ion batteries is very poor. It's a big issue, and it's one of the things that really bothered me when I was spending so much time working on lithium-ion batteries, is that with this explosive growth in the industry, we're going to have such enormous amounts of waste coming up that it's going to be a huge problem to recycle, and even the parts that aren't just recycled, just to dispose of all that. A lot of toxic materials that are very difficult to recover. Fuel cells, on the other hand, much more benign materials, much easier to recover, a lot easier from the recyclability point of view. So then it comes back to, do we really actually need to choose? So some places, depending on the application, it's really much better for a battery, others much better for a fuel cell, but a lot of cases are not really optimal. If you go back to that long list of pluses and minuses, then which one do you want? Well, neither one's completely what you need. And one thing that has changed quite a lot since when I was working in fuel cells is there's a lot more focus on actually hybrids now. So you can have a battery with then a fuel cell added as a range extender, or you can have a primarily fuel cell system with a battery to provide boosts for accelerations. And in the battery also, with regenerative braking, you can recollect that energy as well. So I'll get into some actual applications after all that theoretical background for you. Forklifts, sometimes called lift trucks. So this is actually the biggest application right now for fuel cells. It was the systems I worked on very, very early in my fuel cell days ended up in this application. Back then we were just trying to make something small, so much smaller than a car. We thought it would be used for camping and electricity, backup electricity, that sort of thing. But where it really took off was these forklifts. And there's a few reasons for this. One is that when they're used indoors, it has to be zero emissions. So they can't have any kind of petrol or diesel engine or anything like that. So it's pretty much batteries or now fuel cells. And so the comparison was batteries. And they found that they had just enormous operational gains. And they apparently had these like big storerooms of batteries being recharged. And so they're able to just get rid of that. And so it's extra space, a lot less cost, not having all this excess hardware sitting around. And there were also issues where everyone would come in the morning, get their forklift and get their battery, and all the batteries would die at the same time, so they'd all run back, and there'd be this big traffic jam trying to get the batteries swapped over. And then with the batteries, as the day went on, they would get weaker and weaker. So a box they could lift up in the morning, they couldn't lift up in the afternoon. So again, another big issue. And so with the fuel cells, they were able to just eliminate all these issues. It's exactly the same power all the time, no matter how full the tank is. The operator, if they have 2-3 minutes, they can stop off and refuel whenever they feel like it. And they just don't have all that extra infrastructure to charge batteries. Get into fuel cell systems for the personal vehicles. Now this is where it's, I guess, really struggled to take off, and where Daimler was saying by 2005 they'd be churning out 100,000 a year. Back then, we really didn't see batteries as a viable alternative. The lithium-ion battery was only first commercialized in 1996, so it was still in very early stages, very poor performance at that point. So it just wasn't a viable alternative. We only considered petrol and diesel to be our comparison. So fuel cell systems, they have come along quite quite nicely. There's quite a number of them. I've just posted up 2 here, for example. Toyota Mirai, they're going to be bringing in some, a small amount for trials pretty soon. They do have a small battery, so these batteries can then provide a bit of boost and acceleration, regenerative braking, but you're not going to go very far on 1.6 kilowatt hours. However, the total range, 500 kilometers for the Toyota, and the Hyundai, they've really pushed the range to 800 kilometers. Now, what's interesting is Mercedes. When I was leading the battery integration into the F-Cell 15 years ago, we kept trying to tell management it should be a hybrid, and they kept pushing back and saying, well, no, if it's a fuel cell vehicle, it's a fuel cell vehicle, no battery. And it's apparently in between, the engineers have finally won out, and they've made a plug-in hybrid. So this has a pretty solid power, 147 kilowatts, and they put an 18.8 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery in. Still have quite a small tank of hydrogen. And then, so with this, you can do 49 kilometers range just on the battery, and close to 500 kilometers with the battery and the fuel cell. And this becomes quite a different value proposition, because you could have all of your day-to-day, if you've got 10, 20 kilometers to go to work, you can do all of your day-to-day driving just on the battery, same as any other battery vehicle. And then when you want to go far away, then you don't have any trouble with that range anxiety. You can refill in 2 minutes and on all of these benefits. So it'll be really interesting to see how this goes. They're just putting it on sale now. Now, fuel cell buses, that's really one area that has taken off quite a bit recently. Now, this is interesting. You take the primary powers from the fuel cell, and then the battery provides acceleration and it's recharged through the braking and can be recharged through the fuel cell. But compared to just having a battery bus, you have much higher range, and this is where it goes back to having that. If you want more energy, longer range, then you just add tanks of hydrogen. You don't have to add the whole system. So with that, it's got far lower weight. You can carry more passengers, because most of these are limited by how much weight you can drive on the road. 10-minute recharge, and it can travel any route. So there's a lot of talk of having quick recharge at each station or things like that. But what if your road's being ripped up and you need to take a detour? Then your battery bus won't be able to go there. So the fuel cell bus really allows completely normal operation behavior with the benefits of zero emission and electric drivetrain. So just looking at this, was a fairly recent presentation from Ballard pointing out that they've already got, that not just Ballard, but everyone has over 300 fuel cell buses in operation already, and another 2,000 on order. So, but before 2020, this next 2,000 will be in operation. So it's really doing that hockey stick curve that we saw with electric vehicles. Another really interesting application that's come up is there was a range extender for fleet delivery vehicles. A lot of people are switching to electric vehicles. We heard a talk this morning that was doing that, but they are limited in range. And just watching the talk this morning, it was 250 to 300 kilometers that their systems could do. To get more range, you start adding a lot of weight, then you're limited in how much goods you can actually deliver, so it starts to be a negative proposition. Now, if you add a fuel cell, on the other hand, you can keep the primary battery system, but have that extra fuel cell capacity that will allow you to go a lot further and start to make intercity deliveries and things that you weren't able to do with the pure electric. And then there's the long haul, and that's where fuel cells really do start to benefit from that benefit with the systems providing more range. And fairly recently, this company, Nikola, named after Nikola Tesla, there was maybe another company named after the same guy, but so they're making fuel cell long haul trucks and getting good orders. And they've also got an interesting business model because they're installing refueling stations at strategic locations so that these trucks can always know where they can refuel. So I have to see how that company goes. Didn't want to talk all day, but there are a lot of other fuel cell systems. Trains have now been put in operation, ferries, electric bicycles with fuel cell power, and drones, so unmanned aircraft are a big opportunity as well. Again, where that weight really starts to be important, and you want the range that becomes important. So where do you actually refuel your hydrogen vehicle? So I convinced you all to run out and buy your Mercedes-Benz or your Toyota. Where are you going to refuel? Well, it's not looking good in Australia. there's one Toyota refueling station in Sydney, but otherwise you're out of luck. So that's where it's really taking off in Europe, in China, Japan, South Korea. These places have a lot of opportunities. A lot of cars are starting to be sold, but in Australia, it's maybe not quite tomorrow that you'll be able to buy your fuel cell vehicle and drive around the country. So Australia, though, has, up until this probably, 2 years ago even, there was still very little attention being paid to hydrogen in Australia. And it's really interesting that just this August, all of them in August, there were 3 major reports released funded by the federal government. And the focus of these reports, looking at how can Australia benefit from this huge upsurge in hydrogen activity in the rest of the world. And so their decision was, well, we should really push exports of hydrogen. How can we produce hydrogen and export it? Which is a very logical response. But I find it is maybe a little bit lacking, because we could also be looking at how can we maybe adopt some of these things and see if they make sense here, and rather than just simply be an exporter of natural resources. So I'll just summarize some conclusions. Fuel cells and batteries have a lot of synergy. One thing I think I may have forgotten to mention at the beginning is that they use completely the same drivetrain. Huge amounts of components are the same, so as costs come down for battery vehicles, all those components will also be cheaper for fuel cell vehicles. The pure battery electric vehicle, really good for short range, infrequent use, your day-to-day driving, hour or two a day. The pure fuel cell electric vehicle is really best for really long range, really heavy use, where you want to be able to refuel quickly and go a long time between. And then the hybrid fuel cell battery is really what I like. That could be quite optimal for a lot of other applications. Hydrogen mobility, it is finally catching on globally. It's no longer 10 years in the future for a lot of places. Australia really lacks the refueling infrastructure for broad adoption, so I don't really see it happening here anytime soon. Might still be 10 years away for a while yet. But there is certainly an opportunity for captive fleets with a dedicated refueling station, and that could be quite feasible and beneficial for certain applications. So that would certainly be interesting to start looking at. I just want to thank you for your attention.